So the topic of the day is so-called Europe's Five Future that were published. Well, just have an issue here, but was actually published by just a little bit 1 month ago, March 1st, by the Commission, and available online both in French and in English. And I just put on this first slide one of the main aim of this document. You can see it now. So this white paper maps out the driver of change in the next decade and present a range of scenarios of how Europe could evolve by 2025. So it's a 10-year, a little bit less than 10 years actually, perspective. And then it has a first part where it basically provides some drivers. It's analysis of what key factors or key features are going to have an impact on the EU, and then propose 5 scenarios. And as I say, basically dealing with the future that the EU wants for itself, or that EU citizens wants for themselves, for children and for our union, from, of course, speaking from the EU Commission viewpoint. And we thought that we would use this as a way to showcase that some of the things we do in our executive education program, particularly the international negotiation and policy making program, when we do, we actually just introduce you to tools such as Foresight analysis. And since the title, is it a Foresight? It's really the result of the true Foresight exercise. Is it just an exercise in whitewashing for the EU general public or something else? And I'm going to spend a few minutes on that, maybe just 15 to 20 minutes maximum, and then we'll have an open discussion on these issues. So I'm not going to go through the drivers, but they mention, generally speaking, they say that it's a deeply transformed economy out of the financial crisis in 2008 and 9. It's a deeply transformed continent to some extent, that there has been a lot of transformation in countries outside of the core Western European countries that founded the EU. And now there's a lot of transformation happening first in the North Africa and in the Middle East, and of course even further east, not to mention also things going on in Turkey. So clearly Europe is in the middle of a, let's say, a sea of changes, and both around it, but also within it, as some societies are struggling with how to face these new developments in migration in particular, but not only. So in this context, basically, they came up with the idea of envisioning the future of Europe through 5 scenarios. And these 5 scenarios, which I used copy and paste from the paper itself, the white paper itself, with this use of the flag. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes on these 5 scenarios. If you're interested in detail, of course, it's available online on the EU. If you type Future of Europe, and you'll get that document. But I just want to flash out what is the essence of these 5 scenarios. So as you can see, read it from the slide. The first scenario, they call it carrying on, meaning whatever Europe is facing now, the EU train will go on. So the tracks are there, maybe a lot of vegetation around the track or on the track, but just carrying on business. Business as usual, so to speak. Meaning if one country is about to leave, this is not the end of life, and so we're just going to go on. That's the carrying on. I'll spend a bit more time later on. Then you have all the other 4, so to speak, are variation from this carrying on. The carrying on is say, just let's do what we have been doing, let's continue. There's no, let's say, no big deal, no reason to really kind of panic. Just this is sometimes more difficult than some others. But 4 other scenarios bring something, or actually introduce something new or different from the way the EU has been doing business in the last 15 to 20 years. The first one is called Nothing But the Single Market. As its name indicates, is that it's a refocus of the EU on the single market. So kind of a deeper focus on economics itself, or economics of integration, so to speak, just to preserve what something it's maybe the most valuable benefit, actually. So it's really kind of refocus. Don't get into too much issues on migration, on foreign policy, on issue of peace and security, you name them, just a single market, so to speak. Okay, that's scenario number 2. Scenario number 3 is, well, we'll keep it as it is now, but if we want to go on, rather than go on as in collectively, 27, 28 now, but soon to be, no later probably than 2 years from now, or a bit later, 27. Well, some may go faster than some others. That's the idea of variable geometry. So if some want to go faster or do more, maybe not necessarily faster, but do not only the single market, but migration, peace and security, and regulatory convergence, they can do so. Number 4 is, I think, a variation of number 2, meaning not focusing necessarily on single market, but actually reducing the number of cooperation or areas in which they cooperate, and to do it more efficiently, meaning just somehow actually making the decision making a bit faster, just making sure that if there's a critical mass for doing things, some of member states will not going to actually just be so to say reluctant or renege on some of these obligations. So it's a variation of nothing but a single market. And then lastly, this is basically saying, well, we're now cruising at speed of 100 km/h. Let's just cruise at 200 km/h. So just doing kind of more together and be more ambitious. So that's the ambitious, the highest level of ambition out of there. Okay, these 5 scenarios. Now, interesting question. The first reaction you may have, actually, I had when I read this, is to say, I've seen that before. Not really kind of novel, or what's going on here? Okay, so basically, you could say this is the first reaction I have. Okay, I didn't fall off my chair by saying that. So a bit of a kind of réchauffé, as you say in French, a bit of réchauffé things that we've heard for the last 20 years. Maybe it's the first reaction, maybe unfair, but that's a possible reaction. The second general reaction to this scenario is to say, well, we're playing with the range of variation, which is relatively narrow. So again, if you only get the title of the scenario, what is the difference between nothing but the single market and doing less but more efficiently? You could say, well, there is kind of variation, but focus on the single market is not doing less, but is doing it better, or is doing it more deeply, whereas the other option is really doing less and more efficiently, which is kind of maybe a bit kind of a different way to express it. So when you look at these 5 scenarios, I think 2 general reactions, but I'm sure you have heard, or maybe if you have never heard of that before, but you may feel like them as, okay, that's not a radically new thing, and the range of differences or the range of variation is not, maybe a bit too subtle to really understand it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to leave it there for the moment. And what I'd like to do is to say, okay, fine, whatever our first reaction, is this an exercise, or is this the output, the outcome on an exercise of foresight, where basically planners or policymakers, they try to design a new strategy or a new course of action based on possible future that they will face. So I'm going to walk you through that and then conclude whether it's a foresight analysis or not. So my next slide is we'll introduce you, say, well, how do we do a foresight analysis? What is foresight analysis? Foresight analysis is not an exercise in prediction. It's an exercise in basically open up minds to a range of possible future, and to be as honest, as serious about these futures that one can be. And then when one develops a strategy, to see whether the strategy that one is developing could survive in any of plausible scenarios about the future. And one story, there's many tools to do it, but one tool that has been developed at the University of Hawaii in Manoa in the US, it's really called the 4 archetype method, where you try to push yourself to think of 4 different types of future. And I'm going to present, this is what you see on the slides, and just to say a bit more on that. Before I do that, of course, here I do very quickly, but the idea is to understand trends and signals. I'll say a bit more of that a bit later on, and to see to which extent things that we have seen in the recent past would actually develop into one of these four archetypes, or in which condition they would develop under this archetype. So these four archetypes were assembled or can somehow designed by these people at the University of Hawaii after observing or reading thousands of scenarios developed by public or private organizations when they were doing Foresight. And in fact, all the different scenarios could be somehow simplified or summarized in four archetypes. So the first archetype is what is called growth, which in the mean that it's an anticipation of the future, that the future can be derived from the past. So we have seen things that they have seen in the past, the way it has been evolved. We don't expect any significant change of, let's say, trend, so to speak. So its value is called growth, is that, as I say, the trends and the condition progress in a continuous direction. More or less continuous, of course, it's never kind of a straight line. But there's no big surprise. And of course, those doing prediction on a lot of models, this is their basic assumption, is that we can somehow extrapolate from the past because it's actually not too bumpy. A second archetype for the future is the one on the upper right corner. It's called constraint, meaning at some point we're going to hit a constraint. And so the whole society will have to adapt to that new constraint. So that's the line as is reaching a kind of plateau, and then you have to basically organize the society around it. So it's really, the idea is a core, as it says in text, a core guiding value or constraint, purpose, organize society, and control behavior. So if you suddenly have a resource, typically resource constraint or resource limitation in terms of natural resources or physical resources may actually push a society to, this is the future which is really heavily influenced by such a situation. The third and the lower left is called collapse. That's also kind of where you have a lot of science fiction movies. It's basically you have major things happening in terms of socially or infrastructure, but they will break down, and then this is leading to complete change of society. So a future in which there is collapse, and we have plenty of evidence we have collapse either at the societal level or of course then at sub-societal in terms of organization or city or a firm. This is happening. So this is a possible future. So how do we do if we in a future in which a lot of things would actually start to go wrong or to break down? And finally, the last quadrant and then up in the lower right, it's a situation where we envision a future where there are fundamental reorganization or fundamental change happening, and try to imagine what the strategy for an organization like the EU or a firm, if you're a private entrepreneur, would be in such a situation. And so the idea is to try to identify for each of these archetypal situation, what it would mean for the EU, what it would mean for a business owner, what it would mean for a government, what it would mean for a family, head of family to live in such a future. Just with this benchmark, what I'm going to do is to say, can we classify the 5 scenarios that I briefly discussed that from the Europe 5 future into these 4 quadrants? Okay, which is interesting because you do a foresight, what you do in terms of a foresight, you should really have cover all possibility, all possible futures, summarizing these 4 archetypes should be envisaged and to see how we're going to deal with it. So if I do that, I guess you could already kind of anticipate a bit the result, but I'm not going to be able to fill all these cells. That's of course my own classification, but it's quite interesting using these small flags up there, which I think it really fit more or less well. So clearly this is an exercise in the 5 Europe where we're not being interested in imagining future of the collapse type or the transformation type, according to my argument. I think clearly the growth type is the carry on and the doing much more together. I really like we continue to do things. So as before, either the same pace or just accelerate a bit the pace or the ambition, and we are in the growth situation. On the other hand, clearly we have 2 scenarios that are Well, we have constraint. And the constraint is that we can't work together, or we have maybe lack of legitimacy, lack of trust, so we have to narrow a bit down. So we keep the essence, but under constraints, our core guiding value is either the single market, nothing else but the single market, which is a clear constraint. Or the other constraint is to say, well, we have to do less because now we are overstretched, a bit like an empire that is overstretched, so we have to do things less, but more efficient. And the first one is a bit of kind of the middle, and you see even the icons that have been used actually quite symptomatic. It's a bit kind of in between the two groups, where you see the blue flag, is the European stars that are really kind of very visible on the two on the left, which is much smaller on the right. This is the idea of the constraint. In the middle, you see a bit of the opening. Well, it is a constraint that not everyone would like to walk as long as some individual member states. So let's do a bit of both. So it's the growth for those that want to do more, but it's constrained, taking into account constraint on the other. Now, you see, which is really stunning, there's nothing below the lines on collapse and transformation. Now, and so the big question, you could have two big question marks. So why these things is left out? So there is not, lack of imagination, purpose of the exercise, but clearly it's quite interesting at the time, just I want to go back later to that, but at the time where many people think the EU is facing a formidable challenge or a series of formidable challenge, that there is actually not even kind of a mention of just imagine what could happen, if things would start to continue to go, so to speak, a bit wrong, would be a more collapse situation, or where actually would start to think very differently about how actually things should be handled. So there, conspicuously, this is why, people may have some doubt about whether actually this was a very innovative thing. But for the moment, I just want to do here is, of course, the fact that what you see from these slides, if you would do a true foresight analysis and you would be transparent about it, you would need to fill out the case, the cell collapse and transformation. It's clearly not been the case here. So you already have my answer to foresight? No, but we'll go a bit later to that. So the reason, of course, why don't you have anything in the collapse cell, the transformation cell? Because in the report, there are actually a lot of, or several important questions that have been omitted or neglected. So it's a clear, skewed view of reality in which the EU is located right now. First, is actually very little care or attention put to what Brexit will mean for Europe. Actually, which is interesting, the report starts with the idea that we are 27 in the EU and that will remain 27 until 2025. There's never any mention of possibility to be less than 27 or maybe more than 27. So at least in this year, it's interesting. The first question left out is, what is the signal actually sent, and I'll come to that, by Brexit to maybe other countries? First, if you think about it, just at the time and just before Britain would announce launch officially the Brexit negotiation, this report came out on March 1st, 2017. It's quite interesting that this is completely just out of the document. Second, of course, linked to that, but a more general view, but it's not only Britain, there's actually nothing really, or very little, I would say, on the current populist wave in many European countries. So it's not only Britain, it's France, it's in Central European countries, it is Netherlands, it is, you can name them. Almost every country has a populist wave or populist movement that actually questioning the EU legitimacy. And there's very little in the report mentioned about it. And of course, given this is not mentioned, this could be an argument why actually, if you think of a future, if you have to imagine a future with collapse, you have to feed elements or answers or possible answer to that question. Third, even less so, and I think here maybe kind of a more expectantly so, there is no specific discussion about the effect of the new administration. And the new administration may last 1 year, may last 4, may last 8 years. And if we think we're in 2017 and the report is under 2025, if you have Trump re-elected for 8 years, this is the whole period that is covered by the report. And clearly, this is important. This is impacted, for instance, on the key issue of security. As the US wants to pull out a bit from NATO, this is a huge implication in the EU, and there's a lot of discussion in the report about the future expansion of military spending, but there's actually very little kind of question about how, the effect of the US, different attitude of the US administration for Europe. Similarly, there is very little on the specific relationship with Russia or specific kind of, let's say, anticipation of various scenarios and regarding the relationship with Russia. And of course, whatever is going to happen, it's not only about territorial issue or security, it's also a lot of energy, let's say, supply and energy security and self-standing of the EU really has to be related to the relationship with Russia. So clearly what you see here is that by selectively not addressing this question or in a very partial way or limited way, and of course you can't do a foresight analysis which is looking at all the possible future, because you don't look at things that may actually just help you envisage future that are less rosy, so to speak, than the one that is envisaged in this report. And then same things, last but not least, okay, the problem of migration. We know, and this is really kind of known, that migration will not discontinue, of course, from Syria once the country is empty, and this is not a huge country. At some point it will actually evaporate, but the problem in Africa is very different. We know there's a lot of evidence that when people get slightly richer, they actually even migrate more because they can afford the price of migration. And we also know that with climate change, we'll have more climate change-induced migration, and it's likely to come from Africa. So the problem of migration into Europe is not going to stop, quite on the contrary. And there's actually very little in the report on that. There's a lot of discussion about how Europe is aging, but it don't go up to the point of connecting the various things. So of course, all these questions that may point to difficult future for the EU are not really treated, and so not surprised. The thing that either would the future where we would have a serious collapse or really difficulties not envisaged, and the same on the other side of the pendulum, is no force or no necessary need to discuss transformative scenarios. So how could you really transform to really address this issue? Same thing, I really focus on the fact that how you would do it. What you would do it is you take an event, and in Foresight analysis it's called a signal, as I see what it is, a small local innovation with a potential to disrupt the status quo positively or negatively. You have actually here, Brexit could really be something that could be have a repercussion effect, negatively if it's not done, but also positively because it will be the need to reinvent or to say that maybe, in the end, maybe we should let people in our country just exit, go back to a country, an EU which is much smaller, and this type of things that's actually not mentioned because the EU 27 number is fixed in stone in this report. So again, this is interesting. So clearly just to say that the first impression that it's not a foresight is even reinforced, and what should have been done or question that should have been addressed in order to be a real foresight analysis. So clearly this is not the case. So hence my my conclusion, just to stick within my time limit. So clearly not a foresight exercise. There's absolutely no, despite the use of the future of Europe. So the future of is really typically the name of foresight exercise. A whitewash. Well, here I think you could say yes to some extent, because you don't address the reason that I really think that are really hurting at the root of Brexit and other signals of disillusion within the EU. So you keep saying that it's still a valuable project, it has led a lot of things, but you don't really focus on things that are really just hurting. But I think here I don't think it's a complete whitewash, because there's some discussion of some drivers, social concern or military spending. So it's not complete whitewash, if you want, maybe it's kind of a partial whitewash. And the next question then is, so what is it in the end? Here I would like to offer just a couple of points, and then I'm just be happy to exchange views and to receive questions. So the first thing is that a possibility is it's an exercise in self-reassurance for a commission that is really being shaken and a bit wishful thinking. And as we say, I'm sorry, just to paraphrase in French, our commission, which is lacking ideas and energy, as we say in French, champagne d'idées et de souffle, question mark. Another possibility is, which is raised, which I take from the text itself, is it the basis for, / I quote, an honest and wide-ranging debate with citizens, unquote, and a question mark. I think, given that we're not considering all the possible future, to which extent it is really honest, I very much doubt. So I would be negatively inclined to respond to that one. Maybe probably positively inclined, but I have to be careful here to remain objective in the first answering the first question. But I think in the end, it's clearly, for me, a missed opportunity. That was really a fantastic opportunity that I left to the Commission. The Commission had this ability to somehow take some elevation out of the debate. Just to make a difficult time like Brexit and migration pressure or migration flow, an opportunity to somehow strengthen the essence of the European project, and really to be very honest and to think of what, all the things that can happen. And I think in the end, the very stunning thing is that when you go to Brussels, actually many people working in the EU has even not dared reading it. And those that have read it are felt very disillusioned or very disappointed, because they say, so this is not the idea we have an organization like the EU, but it's just a bit of a réchauffé and a bit quick and dirty scenario that don't really kind of hold the water, so to speak. And I'm going to end on that and just open the question. Thank you. No questions so far? You have to use the Q&A, or just to type your question. So the limits of all these webinars. Or is it an issue technical? Or? The chat maybe says. Sorry, I may have an issue of. Oh, good. Okay, let's start getting. So sorry. So is the chat too, but okay. So I'll take the question that I see here, and then I'll just take a chat of two machines. So the question by Stephanie: how could the Commission really engage in an honest and wide-ranging debate with the EU citizens? That's a very it's a good point, but I think it should really start first. And my point is that don't say it if you don't do it. Basically, I don't think it's a very honest and wide-ranging debate with the EU citizens, because there's actually, I don't think the full range of options is considered. If you want to have a really honest debate, you should open it. So I think it's kind of in between. I think they're sitting between two chairs, so I think they were not forced to do it. But if they do it, then go to the end. Otherwise, don't do it. But I agree, it's a formidable task, and so it's kind of easier said than done. The next question on the Q&A, but then I'll switch to the chat. So, what is the interest in missing such opportunity? Well, there are various stories that circulate in Brussels, and Geneva is sometimes close to Brussels, sometimes very far away. I think many people were quite surprised in the very first place that such an exercise would be done by a commission under the leadership of someone who had just announced that he would not continue. So it's like in Brussels, most people consider Mr. Juncker to be a lame duck. And so you don't want to do such an exercise when the head of the commission is really, is going to disappear, or basically just get out of the scene very soon in terms of timing. So I think it's a bad idea to write a document that you hope would have a very strong impact when you know that the head of the commission has already have very little reputation or credibility, and that's actually clearly a missed kind of lack of management, or lack of kind of even sometimes bon sens. Of course, the other one is, as I think it relates to the first question, is that to which extent the commission has room for maneuver. Now, in the past, when it had room for maneuver, it really needed a very strong leadership and a strong charisma, if you want, of some people in the commission, and we are very far away from it. And we are very far away from now, because the member state made sure that that would not rehappen also, or reoccur too soon. But the transformation was quite clear under the Barroso Commission, where clearly that all this kind of, let's say, intellectual charisma or heavy or intellectual weight, if you want, has gone out of the commission, and so it's very difficult then to do anything serious. Lack of competence, as I can't judge, but basically, I think it's just the timing, what you put into it is questionable. I think, which I find completely surprising and mind-boggling, is the fact that they really just said, we're going to be 27. At the time where everyone is speaking about a possible Brexit, or fix it, for Finland, I think that should at least have been addressed very openly. And I think I'm being a bit provocative here. If some people want to get out of it, it's like in divorce. Why don't you force people, or you don't let people to divorce? I think that simply, and they have to know how to divorce properly without leaving the kids out in the street and basically uneducated and not taken care of. And I think that's Brexit is about. And I think it's really, I'm really sorry to read this is not happening. Chat, yes. To what extent do you think that the heading of the different scenarios are a misnomer? For instance, doing less but more efficiently actually sounds like doing the same and more. Yeah, I think I addressed a bit this issue when normally when you have headings, you would like them to be self-standing, right? That's a common marketing thing. And they are anything, well, the 2 or 3 of them are really not self-standing. After reading the report, and I have to try to explain it without having the report and trying to look at what the report tells me, I have a hard time, which means there's a problem. Okay, and so with misnomer, I think basically they needed a few scenarios apart from, well, let's dig the head in the sand and go on, which is carry over, and let's dream, which is really let's do more. We have to find things in between. Now the variable geometry one is classic. So you had 3, then you had to find, I guess, 1 or 2 more. Doing less. And I think that's the one, I think, as you mentioned, the one was doing less but more efficiently is a bit the one that I don't really understand why they needed it. Well, they could have said 1, except that the single market is one thing, one typical example focusing on the single market. So yes, well taken point about this misnomer. The accession of the other back, and which are the accessions not them by. Yeah, well, clearly you see, which is interesting, is that it's well taken point. They really see themselves at 27 in 2025. So of course they're going to say, yeah, but it's they're going to say this. I'm sure they're going to say this is possible to expand, but they didn't want to open the possibility or the debate about the number, because if you open the possibility of the number, you open it upward but also downward. So we know who wants to join, but we also the possibility who wants to leave. Okay, so it's quite interesting that they didn't want to get into it because it's politically too sensitive. But again, that's my point. If you are honest or you're not, if you're doing politics here, just don't say you're honest. It's just a political game. It's a political thing that you want to come out to reassure yourself, but it's not a honest debate. Because with honest debate, you have to go back to the number. Everyone is saying, maybe we should not have admitted that this country was too soon, too forth, and so forth. So the discussion of who should join and when and the number should be really on the table, and it is clearly not in this report. So that's a big issue. What will be the impact? Just to be very frank, I think people already in Brussels have forgotten about this. Now, we speak about Brexit. Of course, if you think Brexit is the issue, the future of the EU, what's going to happen with Brexit, this document is just irrelevant. And that's why I think I say it's a missed opportunity, because it's barely 1 month over. In the past, when you had white paper from the Commission, this white paper was cited for years. This one is already passed away, is already dead now. I think no one, or very few, you rarely see in the news, if you look at the regular news website in Brussels, there's hardly any mention of that. So it's 1 month away and looks like it was, 25 years ago. Well, the variable geometry scenario, which is interesting, as the report says, there's already this basis in the treaty with the enhanced cooperation scenario. The difficulty, I think, of this variable geometry scenario is that you see it now, I think you've seen it with Britain and Denmark already on the euro, is that when you start having you have clubs within clubs. And the problem is that how can you do that without weakening the broader club? So are you not emptying, under which condition you can allow some countries to do more without somehow emptying the raison d'etre, or the benefit of those that are not into the smaller club to still be in the bigger club. Okay? If the idea is to somehow emptying most of the results that you have in being member of the EU by allowing some to go faster, then you're killing the EU, or you're basically admitting that we need an EU with smaller number of countries. So this variable geometry scenario, how it has been put into the treaty with enhanced cooperation, is very restrictive. You can only do it under some condition, very tightly conditioned, that countries accept them. A sufficient minority of countries want to do it, and it has to be endorsed with the whole group. So I think it's variable geometry, but in a very sticky way. And so it seems to me that it's not going to work well, because then this north, south, center, periphery, you're doing club within the club, and that's defeating self-defeating the purpose of the EU. Yeah, and I'm switching. Oh, without, yes. Just switching between the chat and the Q&R. So short-term versus long-term. So the problem seems to be the dichotomy between the long-term plans of building the EU and the short-term horizon of the national election in member countries. In a very open country with the core pro-Europe faction of population silent majority doesn't care. Do you? Then there's something missing. So do you agree? Well, I would almost be tempted to say that this report addresses neither of the short term nor the long term. Because if you play it really short term and you want to address concern of people in member countries, then you engage upfront some of the concerns, migration in particular, but not only income disparity, debt level, and how to which extent the southern country maybe they have to pay back some of the debt, and so on and so forth, and you engage with that. And so there, I think it was a bit of an attempt to say, let's forget all of that, put it into a ground clothing, and hope for the best. So it's really I think it's really wishful thinking exercise that they really wanted to say in prelude, maybe just to make sure that the anniversary of the Treaty of Rome is not going to be a funeral, so to speak, for the EU. But I think I'm not I'm not even quite sure it's a dichotomy. Of course, they have a short-term problem, but this is why you do foresight, because what we have now are signals of things of the future. So are the current election or tension in elections signals of things to come? Are they going to be general? This is going to be a general trend or not? And then you really do engage with that, and you look at the causes, and you say, well, no, because maybe this is just the last resistance of those that are against Europe, and they're going to give in at some point. But you engage with that much more. So what I would agree is that the Commission has not played its role of giving a kind of intellectual impetus, but it's just playing a role of being torn between a lot of constraints and being irrelevant from a powerful perspective of someone can actually shape or lead. The Commission is expected to be a bit of a leading role. It's a government of Europe, if you think it this way, and clearly it's actually not playing its role of leadership. You can't really blame it because there's very few governments in Europe that are, or a few head of government that have a leadership kind of style or even potential nowadays. So it's just a reflection of what it is. It's not more than that. A question on the chat. According to your opinion, are the Eurocrats in Brussels thinking, speaking, acting honestly? What is the level of sincerity? That's a very broad question. I think, well, the Eurocrats, of course, I guess what you mean by that, a member of the civil servant, not the parliament members. So I think it's a difficult question. I think they are. This is not an act of speaking to you if you just interview them or have them on the phone. It's just it's a massive communication exercise. And there, I think they are clearly, if I see it from the documents, that was my point. This is not honest. You can't and you should not avoid a question of things can go really bad for EU. It's not that I just want, I'm just personally, I think it's a great project. It should be preserved, but I think we should be facing the reality. If 1 month from now, Madame Le Pen is elected as French president, we are in serious trouble as a EU, really serious. Okay, and I think this is not Mad Max. It's not like complete kind of scientific science fiction scenario. There is some probability that she may be elected. And I think in that sense, I think, or maybe if it's not Madame Le Pen, maybe someone kind of far right, which is completely against EU in a significantly important country or a series of countries. And I do think this is honesty to open that. And of course, the difficulty is that if some would find if you mention this, you are actually biasing and trying just to say how bad it would be under Madame Le Pen or on someone else. But I think a honest discussion would be of that. And I think, frankly, it's difficult for people working in the EU Commission to be very honest about it. So I think it's a matter of being able to do it. But at least when you just print out a document which clearly does not highlight some aspect that should be highlighted, this is not honesty for me. But to make the jump from a document to whether individuals working in the EU are honest, that's a bit difficult. I do think that many people there, if not most people, tend to be honest. And if you have discussion in Brussels, this is why discussion in Brussels are pretty gloomy and pessimistic nowadays, if you take to your contact there, because they are much more honest than this document basically indicates. How do you see the future development of the single market? More scenario 1, scenario 2, or scenario 4? I think I think clearly the member states are going to stick to the single market, and they're probably going to really, I'll put it this way, to really kind of be putting it forward as this is what we need in the time. And you see from the document, time and trouble, when you have new actors, the BRICS, Chinese, and so on and so forth getting out. This is just the tangible, if you want, of the single market. I also think this is a problem. You don't sell a market to a public. This is not fun. This is not sexy. This is not fun. When you want to vote for Europe, this is a market. Oh, great. You want to be excited by a market? No. So I think that's, but this is what they're doing because this is what they really kind of hold on. Now, the big question mark is how they're going to handle the British demand regarding free movement of people. And I think this is why in this discussion of red lines on both sides of the channel, the free movement of people is so central, because you can't really have a single market if you want a free movement of person. And so that's on all these scenarios, you see why it's so crucial. So what does it mean? Can you have a single market with some limitation, quotas, or safeguards, or any free movement of people, and so on and so forth? Same thing for the money. If you really have a single market without a single currency or without some stabilization of currencies is very difficult. By the way, most people have forgotten, but this is why they moved to Europe. They didn't move to Europe because they were dreaming and there was a sense of their first love, basically were falling in love. It's because they had tried for more than 20 years to do anything else but a single currency. And they ended up, if we want to preserve the single market, we have to have some kind of currency stabilization. This is not going to happen in a continent in which you have wide disparities in the reputation of currencies. Be it, i.e., we trust very highly the German mark, but much less the other currency. And so this is very difficult to stabilize. This is not going to disappear. If whatever would happen, you would actually just untie the knots of the single currency now. It will even worse. I think the German reputation is even higher up than the other country. So I think by future development single market, I think all these things had to be actually put into it. They probably also have in mind the level of regulatory convergence, standardization across economies, and that's in line, for instance, with, of course, the treaties that they just signed with Canada, but also if there will be any resurgence of something like with the US. Any more? I don't see much more here. No open questions. Well, we still have a few minutes if you are still further questions. Quite stimulating exchange. So, any last minute urgent, basically, demand, comment, views? Nope. Someone is typing yes. Maybe no. Seems to be no. Okay. So thank you for joining today, and if you have I hope this is stimulating, and if you want to continue this exchange, of course you're always welcome to come at the Villa Barton on the shore of the Lake of Geneva and continue this discussion in one in our program. And Foresight analysis is one tool that we use now in most of our program, and we address questions such as that. And I'm very thankful here to the EU Commission to have reminded me with an example of what Foresight should not be if you use the method to the end, but it's also not an exercising method. Yeah, just one thing. Can we receive the PPT is possible? Yes, of course, yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good end of the day or evening or morning, wherever you're located. And I hope that we'll have the pleasure to see you one day in our rooms here in Geneva. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.